The NBA draft is behind us, and now we can talk about the two huge trades that happened in the NBA over the past few days. The first one, of course, is Giannis moving to Miami in exchange for a very, very big package instead of Boston, which at first seemed like the deal was going much more in their direction because they had a real all-star to offer with Jaylen Brown. But in the end, it turns out that Boston didn't want to give up Hugo Gonzalez, and that's why the deal fell through. Along with that, Milwaukee was worried that Jaylen Brown wouldn't want to stay there. Totally understandable. So even though Milwaukee isn't getting Jaylen Brown here, in exchange for Giannis and Bobby Portis, which is also a player I personally really like, and we'll talk about that in a moment, they're getting Tyler Herro, Kel'el Ware, who was the 15th pick in the draft 2 years ago, a player who on the surface seems to have a lot of advantages and is a great fantasy player, but I've talked about the fact that he has a lot of issues when it comes to basketball IQ, so to speak, and I think Miami won't be too happy about that despite his great potential. Jaime Jaquez, who was also a first-round pick in 2023, and Kasparas Jakučionis, who was a first-round pick last year at number 20, also a player it wasn't exactly clear where he'd go. Players who on the surface have potential, both Kel'el Ware and Jaime Jaquez. Jaime, you could also say he made the leap last year and proved himself efficient from the start. In my opinion, these things have a lot of value because Jakučionis is like getting a first-round pick in the draft in any draft, just not a very high pick. With Kel'el Ware and Jaquez, you already know what you're getting from them, so I also compare it to a kind of first-round pick for building a team around these young guys. Tyler Herro, an all-star a year and a half ago who played 77 games and excelled in Miami 2 years ago, struggled with injuries last year. The team is acquiring him at a low point. Although he grew up in Milwaukee, rumors say the Bucks plan to trade him for more players. I also think he has high value in the market, and they could do that pretty easily and build another core here, even younger. Even though Herro is still not, you can't say he's old, he's 26. In addition, Milwaukee got the 13th pick, which became Natea Mant in the last draft, and they're getting 2 first-round picks in 2031 and 2033, and a draft pick swap in 2030. And something important I want to say about draft pick swaps. It used to be considered not such a big deal, but because of the change in the lottery where they draw among more teams, and there are 14 teams in the lottery with almost identical odds, except for the 3 teams at the very bottom, it can really double your chances of getting into the top 3 or 4. So in my eyes, it becomes a much more significant asset, especially if you get it from a team that's not supposed to make the playoffs, or is borderline, which looks like what's going to happen with Miami in 2031. And I'm saying this now because it will also be relevant for the next trade with LaMelo Ball and Minnesota. In my opinion, even though Milwaukee didn't get a player on the caliber of Jaylen Brown here, they still got a lot, and they got Tyler Herro, who's not that far from him in his prime. I mean, he's an excellent player. Obviously, he probably can't lead a team as the primary scorer, especially not a playoff team, but that's a great core to build on. Young players with good strengths, and Tyler Herro, who you can either flip or keep whatever they want here. Makes perfect sense, and it's also logical that they'd want to try to cash in on Herro before they have to pay him, because he'll probably cost a lot in Milwaukee's situation, and because his contract ends at the end of this year. I mean, this is the last year of his contract, and a lot of teams will want a player who makes $33 million and comes off their books at the end of the year. They also have Miles Turner and are still paying Damian Lillard, though he's clearly not on the active roster. Kuzma, AJ Green, Jaime Jaquez, Kevin Porter Jr. He has a player option, he's becoming a free agent. In short, they've improved Milwaukee's post-Giannis future with Jackson, Ryan Rollins, AJ Green, and others, making it less bleak even without a clear franchise player. I'm sure for them, this is the time to maybe try to move Miles Turner in some deal. At least that's what I would do. Bottom line, in my opinion, they maximized what they could get for Giannis at age 32, and I think it's an excellent trade for Milwaukee. I would even give them, honestly, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, considering the amount of assets they managed to get in return for Giannis, who's coming off a year of injury and has already run his course with the team. And now let's take a look at this from Miami's side for a moment. Miami gave up a lot of really good assets here, both present and future, to bring in a 32-year-old player like Giannis, along with Bobby Portis, who's also 31 or 32. Yeah, 32. And right now you can see their roster, which is very problematic. By the way, it's funny that the AI translated Bam Adebayo as Idris Adebayo. That's actually his real name, by the way. In short, the roster is Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bam Adebayo, who's signed for 2 more years with a player option for the 3rd year, Andrew Wiggins, who has a player option that right now I'm sure everyone in Miami is looking at and wondering what he's going to do with it and whether he's going to exercise it, a $30 million option. Norman Powell also just left for free agency, and it's doubtful he'll come back, which is a very significant player. In short, this is a very unbalanced team. Even a player like Adebayo, I don't see how he fits playing specifically with Giannis on the same court. It's true that Giannis, even though he wasn't healthy last year, if he's healthy this year, in any case, puts Miami as a team that's supposed to at least make the playoffs, which doesn't really change much from where Miami has been until now, somewhere in that mediocre area. But they'll have to build in a very immediate and quick time frame. In the next year or two, a team with a lot of shooting that fits with another significant player here so that not all the burden and load is on Giannis. Otherwise, what's the point? Did he leave Milwaukee for Miami only to wind up in the same spot? I can't grade this trade yet since Miami gave up so much. The question is whether they'll be able to build around Giannis a team that I'm not even saying is a championship contender, but a team that can compete at the playoff level, where you look at them and say that's a team that can win a series around in the playoffs. Currently, they're far from that since the team's makeup is unclear. They'll need to sign free agents, pursue more trades, and they've already given up many assets. Definitely their entire young core for a 32-year-old player, I remind you, who just came off an injury, although when he's healthy, he's a top 3 or 4 player in the NBA. No one has any doubt about that. But he's a player who, even though he's top 3 or 4, is very niche because you need specific players around him. You could say the same about Luka and Jokic needing shooters, but it's more obvious with Giannis since he plays in the paint more. So I hope they have a plan and they know what they're doing, or that Wiggins knows what he's doing. I guess so, because in the end, Miami's management really knows how to make these deals and also knows how to build teams from nothing, knows how to bring in and develop players from scratch. I trust them to be able to make it happen. I just hope they do it fast enough so they don't lose all those assets, just to end up with a team that's still mediocre like Miami has been in recent years. Even the year they reached the NBA Finals with Jimmy Butler, they were just a mediocre team with a great coach. It was a crazy story that won't happen every year, if it happens even once a decade. And from here, we'll move on to the next big trade. Minnesota brings in LaMelo Ball along with Josh Green in exchange for Naz Reid, an unprotected first-round pick in 2023, in the 3 years when Charlotte can swap their own first-round pick in 2028, 2029, and 2030, continuing what I mentioned earlier about the value of those pick swaps. Add another 3 second-round picks, which aren't very valuable now, but it's something. In any case, I'll give a take here that I know from comments on social media that a lot of you probably won't agree with me, but that's what I think, and I'm here to share my opinion and explain to you why I think this way. In my opinion, Minnesota went all in here and also gambled on the future of Anthony Edwards within the team. They're trying somehow to please him and bring in some all-star next to him, thinking that if they bring him and manage to put together an excellent starting 5, because they do have an excellent starting 5, along with McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, they can convince him that they can build a championship team. But Minnesota, just in the last 2 years, lost Karl Anthony Towns in exchange for Julius Randle, then traded away Julius Randle for almost nothing, and now they've also traded away Naz Reid, who in my opinion was an incredible find for them and a very, very important player on this team, in exchange for a player like LaMelo Ball, who on paper at least is a much better player than Naz Reid. Yours truly, as many of you know, is not a big fan of LaMelo Ball. I'm not crazy about his game. I think his style of play is very ineffective. It's true, he's flashy, and he dishes out a lot of assists, grabs a lot of rebounds, scores a lot of points, hits a lot of threes, but that doesn't necessarily translate to effectiveness. While Charlotte's offense has performed well with him this past year, I don't credit him alone. Much has changed, especially with Antetokounmpo joining the team, and I think Charlotte realized what they have in their hands with Antetokounmpo, especially with the growth of Brandon Miller over the past year, and the way they finished last season along with Kobe White, who they just extended for another 3 years because they also have the cap space. They really sold high here. I really think they sold high on a player like LaMelo Ball, even though they didn't get an all-star or an exceptional player in return, but rather a lot of assets they can use in the coming years. Also, the pick swap with Minnesota, in my opinion, they're even gambling with those pick swaps on LaMelo Ball's inability to stay healthy. I'll remind you that in 6 seasons, he played at least 70 games only twice, with this year being the second time. That happened while he averaged about 20 minutes per game, 7 minutes less than the 2022-2023 season, and 4 minutes less than last season, reducing his minutes, helped him play more games, and then he was traded to Minnesota, a team desperate for a point guard. However, Minnesota didn't necessarily need a point guard like LaMelo Ball. That's a serious question about how the backcourt will work, and I doubt it will, making Minnesota less competitive than before. Their depth is questionable. With Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, Rudy Gobert, McDaniels, and Dosunmu, the starting 5 looks strong. But Josh Green and Donte DiVincenzo are on expiring contracts, and DiVincenzo won't play this year due to an Achilles injury. So Bringer, Shannon Jr., and Mamadou Gueye, that means heavier loads for LaMelo Ball and Anthony Edwards, and LaMelo hasn't shown he can handle that, especially in minutes. They'll need to add more players. They're already paying $210 million this year, even before we even talk about free agency. I don't know how much more they can bring in, but definitely not any really significant players, and Minnesota isn't exactly an attractive market, let's put it that way, for NBA players. Charlotte, on the other hand, is getting the ultimate complementary player with Naz Reid, a guy who was the 6th man of the year. He comes off the bench in Minnesota, does what needs to be done as a 6th man. He can play 30 minutes, he can play 20 minutes, he's effective either way. As a player who can play stretch 4, stretch 5, and I think getting away from the dependence on LaMelo Ball in this team will only do them good. We already saw this last year when they brought in Sexton and then Kobe White. They tried to bring in players who could be playmakers instead of LaMelo Ball in case he got injured, and the fact that he was healthy was just a bonus, but they turned those players into very effective players who came off the bench as 6th men. So yes, they have Kobe White, which in my opinion is a downgrade, downgrade, but not such a significant downgrade. Maybe in playmaking, but not in shooting. They have Bridges here, a contract that's expiring, which they can still trade. Brandon Miller, who is set to become a restricted free agent at the end of this season, and they'll probably extend his contract and probably give him a nice deal, because last year he proved he can really be the player they expected him to be as the second pick in the draft. Konka Nipel, what can I say? Really, it's no wonder he was competing for Rookie of the Year against Cooper Peleg. A huge player. I think building around him as the franchise player together with Brandon Miller is a very good decision on their part. I really like the direction they're going in addition to the fact that they have a $40 million trade exception, which means that if they want to make a trade and bring in a player with a bloated contract they believe can take them to the next level, they're currently second in the NBA in the number of picks they have, and the amount of assets there just keeps piling up. In my opinion, this is the next team in the East. I think next year we should expect them to be a top 4 or 5 team in the East and a powerhouse, not just because of their quality, but also their depth. The players are mostly from the same draft classes, about the same age, not too old, and all on reasonable contracts. Naz Reid is on a reasonable contract. Kobe White, you could say, is also on a reasonable contract for his situation. Add to that the 2 draft picks they made this year, along with Cal Briner, who was a second-round pick and had some very impressive performances last year, showing that he can be relied on. Moussa Diabate is also 25, and I assume they'll want to extend his contract too. So after a few good draft picks, a lot of young talent, and plenty of draft picks they have for the coming years, along with Minnesota's assets, it reminds me of certain teams from the West, and I think that's exactly where Charlotte is headed. They've built really well, and I think it was the right timing for them to move on from LaMelo Ball. I wish LaMelo Ball and Minnesota success, I just don't see it happening, and that's my personal opinion. You're welcome to disagree with me in the comments, that's totally fine. I'm here to give my opinion, I'm not a prophet, I'm just saying how I see things at this point in time. Thank you very much for watching, friends. Don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. On the screen there are more videos you might like. I'm Yisrael Chai. See you, bye.